Welcome. Today with me I have two fabulous guests, Adrian Kibbler and Safaraz Ali. Gentlemen, welcome. I would like to open the floor to Adrian first to tell us a little bit about himself, his work and what he has to offer in the subject of business books.
Well, I think I'm completely out of place today because I'm a fraud, you know. I'm not a writer of books, but I have actually spent my life eking out a living scribbling on the back of adverts, because my life's been in newspapers and magazines and public relations. But I suppose over the course of 40 years, and yes, it is that long, I haven't just had a hard life. I've probably written hundreds of thousands, if not millions of words. And I write because that puts a roof over my head and bread on the table. I also actually write because I really quite enjoy it as well.
That's very good to hear. And Safaraz?
That was a very animated introduction, Adrian. That was very animated there. I write, similar to you, I write because I enjoy it. Unlike your good self, I don't make a living from it. Yes, I have published a book recently, but I regard myself as a business person, entrepreneur, and I run a education and training company, a domiciliary care business, and I dabble in a few of the smaller businesses as well.
Fantastic. It's great to see a different perspective, to have a man that makes his living off the written word and a man that has just started dabbling. And I know for a fact, because I have reviewed his book 52 Canny Bites, and I also know that Mr. Ali is releasing his second book. So today, gentlemen, I would like to open the floor and say, when you're looking for a business book to help you, what do you look for? Adrian, I'd like to start with you first.
For a good read. An interesting tale, a story that's told well. I have long passed the time when I read a book like I might have done at school or college because it was part of the curriculum. So the criteria I use for a business book is the same criteria that I would use for a biography or a novel or any other piece of written work. It has to engage with me pretty much from the beginning.
Safaraz, how about yourself, sir?
Okay, I'll add a few things to what you've said, but I'll start off with firstly just saying that this might sound a little bit odd, but I'm a big believer that most business books are not read completely, and the purpose of that business book isn't achieved. Having a business book on your shelf doesn't help anybody. There's no impact for it. Most business books are written, unfortunately, to promote the author, which is, and there's stories behind it. So some of them are long. They're potentially maybe repetitive, and as you said, it needs to be engaging. And it's like a film to a certain level. You can either lose track of it, and you sort of switch off, and you may get to the first chapter and you feel that that's not for you, or you might dip into the book and feel you've taken as much as you can. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 messages in a book. Even if you read from cover to cover, you remember only 2 or 3 messages. And that's one of the differences the difficulties that I found was that a lot of people talk about recommending business books, and I used to go to a number of networking events, and particularly the property networking sector. They sort of recommend Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and various others. And what you find is a lot of people go out and buy those books, but in the end, not many read. And again, you've got to take it from a perspective of forget about the book itself, but how do you actually learn? How what makes you tick and what engages you? And if you know yourself in terms of if you're more visual, if your reading styles, your reading habits, and then what you'll find is that you'll pick a book that suits you rather than a book that is recommended by somebody else.
Yeah, I agree with Safaraz there, and I think let's be honest about it. When I go into a bookshop, one of the things that first of all, attract me to any. Well, there are 2 things that will attract me to a book. First of all, who it's written by. Is it a name that I recognise it. It's a name that I'm familiar with. Is it somebody whose views I want to hear? And the second thing, let's be honest about it, Saf, is, you know, we're all driven by imagery, and if there's an attractive cover,
Yeah.
then I'm more likely to pick it up. And it's a bit like a shop. You know, you can have the best shop in the world, but if the front window and if the shop isn't appealing and it doesn't get you to walk in, it doesn't really matter what's inside. So some people are a bit sniffy about the cover, or it's only a cover. And I mean, you know, with your books, I know that you've done an awful lot of work on the covers of your books, because you recognise that if it was just a plain cover and it didn't grab the eye, then the chances of somebody actually picking up and looking at it, unless it's your close relatives or somebody who feels sorry for you, they're not likely to do it, are they?
Saf, I'd like to hold you on that point, because what I find fascinating here is the two different thought processes that are coming in looking into a business book. You have here Mr. Adrian Kibbler, who is a journalist by trade, so when he looks for a book, he wants... I'm sensing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you want a story. You don't want a bullet point or something to learn off. You want to hear the person's story, their journey. And that's what you're going to get from it. And from you, Safaraz, as a man who has only just started in his journey of literature and writing, wants just to have bullet points, something that, as I said in my review of 52 Canny Bites, that you can tear out, that you can pin on the wall, and that's what you get from books. I just find that fascinating, that people from different worlds have the different expectations. Now,
no, first of all, that's not true. I mean, I'm quite happy to receive my information in bullet point format up to a point, but I still want the thing to be interesting, and I still want the thing to have some context. And I don't want to be a bore, but I probably will be. So why change the habits of a lifetime? The journey. I make a journey from Birmingham to London, or from Birmingham to Aberdeen. I hate this term journey. Your business journey. Your business journey is from success to failure, or whatever it is, and the people that say that are usually American as well. You know, it's one of those cliched buzzwords which has no place in my judgment. But to deal with your specific issue and to stop mildly ranting away here, I'm quite happy to get information in bulletproof format, but whether it's bulletproof or whether it's plain text, it has to be interesting. It has to be relevant to me.
I think just to add to that, I mean, firstly, you got to know yourself in terms of what makes you tick, what suits you. I mean, if you're a person that gets their information from listening, auditory, visual, you know, if you like pictures. I mean, you talked about obviously the front cover. That, you know, the front cover does sell, and many books change their front covers, and you know, you have a book that's failed, and because they've changed their front cover and they've got it designed, the same book version 2 sells. So front covers do sell, cover does sell, and people do judge a book by the cover, as the saying goes. But please understand firstly what what perspective you're looking at. Is it information? Is it knowledge? Is it, you know, are you looking for a story? You know, what are you looking to get out of it? If you're looking to read books to further enhance your personal growth, then consider, is there other ways to do this? Is it by, you know, listening to podcasts, listening to Audible? Is there videos? Is there other means that you can get that information? Is it magazines, business magazines? You know, it's not necessarily book is the answer. And what I found is sometimes books have been oversold as, you know what, if you're not reading, you're not developing, and if you're not reading, then you're not growing. And every business person needs to be reading. That's slightly, I think, overselling a business book, and because it doesn't suit everybody.
I would agree with that very much. As myself, I've been in business now for 8 years, and I suffer severely from dyslexia. So, although when I read a business book, I find it very difficult due to my dyslexia. But going back to the point I raised earlier, if I do look for a business book, I look for bullet points because I find it very difficult. The other point is that I do enjoy a story, and things like Audible and YouTube have been so helpful for me as a business person. So, going on from this tangent, business books, we're seeing them everywhere at the moment. A lot of them are self-published. the thing I want to ask is self-publishing bad? Because anyone can self-publish their book. Does it water down the messages that business books are trying to deliver?
Seth, I think you better go first on that one. You're a self-published author at the moment.
Yeah, I think the pace of change, the technology has allowed publishers or allowed individuals to publish, and it's a technology thing rather than anything else. The barrier to entry in terms of getting your book out there is minimal now. It's very similar to you creating a website or a blog. Anybody can do it. Anybody can publish their thoughts out there, and I think that's just a technology thing that everybody's embracing. What you're finding is that people perceive business books in a slightly different way. Business books now are about selling the author, about selling the author's journey. Again, a word I know you don't like, but the individual's journey, the author's beliefs, the author's views, and also selling the author's business via a mechanism of the book itself. So, how business books have changed is considerable. Moving away from a subject matter that a publisher will ask maybe an individual to write about, to an individual writing about their business and their thoughts and advice that they share with effectively customers, potential customers, in a book format. So a lot of books now are published for a different reason. They're selling the author as opposed to selling books itself. So most people now that actually publish a book are looking to sell themselves, and they use that book as a promotion tool for their consultancy, for their ideas, for their thoughts. Richard Branson, when he wrote his book, did it to nurture the culture of Virgin. Yeah, his main purpose was not to sell books, not to make money from selling books, but to actually sell the brand itself, to talk directly to his employees, to the staff, and also potentially raise the profile of the brand even further and himself even further. So it's the whole market has changed, and it's self-publishing is just a mechanism to get your thoughts out there.
I don't think it's a case of self-publishing good or bad. I don't think that's the issue. I think we've got to apply a bit of context to this. It's incredibly difficult to get a book published in the traditional way. Most publishers are incredibly risk averse. They like to stick to authors that have been tried and tested and that have been successful. And the fact that the new world gives people that want to try their hand at writing an opportunity to appear in print, I think has to be a good thing. And I think that unfortunately, the problem with it's a little bit like television channels. When I was a youngster, we had 4 or 5 television channels, and now we've got 400 or 500 television channels, but the number that we've got is in inverse proportion to the quality. And the fact that publishing a book now is so easy means that whilst there are some little gems around, and I'm sure Safaraz fits into that category, but there's also an awful lot of rubbish. Certainly the majority of self-published business books are much more about people trying to use it as a promotional tool rather than anything else. I think the problem with that, of course, is that unless it's a good book. So yeah, self-publishing is in some respects a good thing. I personally think I've not written a book. I've not written books, but I can't imagine that it's as satisfying as having been through a process of being to a publisher, and a publisher has said, yes, I like this, I think this is worth doing. I would have thought that has to give far more satisfaction than publishing something yourself. Now, there are some people who write good self-published books who will then want to go on to see if they can go in print via the traditional route, and they'll use it as a learning process, and that's a good thing. Even if the publisher in the first instance says, this is quite interesting, I like this, I like the concept, they will then come back and say, but you need to change X, Y, Z and all the rest of it. So one of the advantages with self-publishing is it does give you a lot more freedom, provided it's legal, honest and vaguely decent, then you can say what you like. It's not quite the same with a...
But we seem to have come to a point that I would like to ask, and the only man around the table here that has written a book is Safaraz. And as Safaraz said earlier, that most people write books to publicise themselves, their businesses, their views. Saf, why did you write a book?
I think it's the journey that I was on. For me, it's there's a small part of it which is about personal accomplishment. And we set ourselves targets and goals and look at stretching ourselves and we talk about comfort zones and potentially working outside our comfort zones and also potentially stretching the comfort zone so it becomes easier for you. And I was on a journey of personal growth and development, and that journey was for me about writing. So it was writing, it was also communicating, and for me, I'm on a journey at the moment in terms of developing my personal presentations. I'm a very sort of introvert person, and for me, I've shied away from doing presentations and talking publicly. So I'm on a journey of putting myself out of my comfort zone, doing things like this, doing sort of talks, delivering presentations, keynote presentations, and being part of panels. I've been on a journey where I'm looking to develop my skill sets as well, and that's been not in terms of writing emails, but in terms of putting my thoughts on paper. What my beliefs are, what my thoughts are, what have I learned as part of my conducting business. Just wanted to pick up on what Adrian was saying earlier on about traditional publishing and self-publishing, and my comment really was the fact that there is a third way. There is a way where it can be a combination of having a publisher who's a professional to sort of handhold guide that individual. So it's not just that individual, that author doing everything on their own, and it's about working with somebody, and that relationship could be an element of coaching, that could be sort of professional sort of designers in terms of book covers, that could be somebody getting the individual's thoughts across, could be there's an element of ghostwriting, could be editing, a whole combination which is bespoke and worked with that individual to offer a service to allow that entrepreneur, say, and author to become the author. We talked about earlier on the fact that a badly published book can actually dent your reputation, can make a big negative impact on your reputation, and sometimes having that sort of advice, guidance, the support of somebody who's got experience will alleviate some of the mistakes and the concerns that somebody may have, the fact that this could backfire. So it's not always about going onto Amazon CreateSpace and just getting your stuff out there. You can work with somebody, and you can go out to the marketplace and find individuals or find publishers that will share the journey with you. I'm probably overusing the word journey because of your initial sort of comment, but share that journey with you. But also they can be paid for doing that work, but they can also be remunerated on a profit share basis. So
could I ask you, Saf, is that what you did?
No, I have not gone out there to work with a hybrid publisher. I'm as you know, I'm a founder of ThinkFest, which organise the Business Book Awards, and we work with Lucy, who's the founder, and she runs a company called Rethink, and they're a hybrid publisher. So I had various options of going to hybrid publishers. Our head judge for the Business Book Awards is Alison. She runs a publishing house, and many others, and they're in my sort of circle of contacts and people that I could sort of knock on the door and speak with. But what I decided to do was, again, part of my own reasons for doing the book were about pushing myself in terms of my own accomplishments and so forth. What I have done is I've gone to individuals, to professional designers, but I've worked with them personally. So I'm not going through somebody else getting them to do it. I'm working and crafting that and sort of sculpting the design and feel for it. And I'm also gone to editors to make sure grammatically it's right, it flows right, and so forth. But what I didn't want to do is really dilute that whole process and really, that book being somebody else's thoughts and processes. So I wanted to have a little bit more ownership, so I can actually say, I've gone through that journey myself.
Going to you for a moment, since you are the only one with a book here, I know that your second book is coming out in under a year. Now, I have the question, did you feel that the first book you wrote wasn't up to snuff? Do you think that you could have combined the two and released it later? Or have you got the journalistic bug about you?
The Canny Bites journey started for me December.
Journey is a safe word.
Yeah, I love the word journey, and I'll probably overuse it now deliberately for that particular reason.
That word is safe here, so you are. Feel free to say it.
So December 2016, I came up with the idea of Canny Bites, and I wanted short, sharp bursts or smart bursts of information that I wanted to share. And initially, Canny Bites, the journey started off as videos. So creating shorter videos that we can publish on YouTube, that we can, get the message out there. And what I did was similar to how Jeremy Clarkson writes his books. If you know what he does, he basically he used to write for the Sunday Times and he used to write for various magazines. And all he does is then collates them all together and puts them into a book. So from my perspective, it wasn't the book first; it was videos. So I wrote content for videos. Which again is a different style of writing, graphically and so forth. So I created content, then worked with designers, worked with video professionals, and got videos out. And then I thought, I've got material here, and looked at what can I do with that content, because I'm a big believer in reusing content, recycling content, and using content a number of times in a different formats. So if I've got a blog, I'll see can I create that into a video, maybe that video into maybe an audio file, maybe that audio into something else as well, and maybe a PDF or a PowerPoint type presentation. So I try and use different platforms for that same idea and the concept. So the second book is now called Another 52 Bites, which again, works in terms of a family of books. So I see this as a family of two books. So what I'm looking now to do is to look at specific industries. So for example, I'm thinking at the moment now, so rather than having a number, Canny Bites for recruitment professionals, maybe Canny Bites for people who are not from a recruitment background, who want to recruit or need to recruit for their own business. So information that's specific for a sector. You've heard of books. You've heard of the saying "finance for non-finance professionals." So things which I can look at, and it can also be a brand where I can collaborate with others. So I can get somebody from maybe the digital sector and work with them in terms of a format. So there's an element of utilizing that brand for partnership work, utilizing that brand to actually share information, nuggets of gold, pearls of wisdom for specific sectors. So I'm thinking in terms of what the best way is for that. But there is going to be a slight change in terms of the next journey.
So you would like to have Canny Bites as the Encyclopedia Britannica of business. That is a very noble way of thinking, Safaraz. As time runs out, I would like to finish our conversation with one question. Is there a future for business books? We see so many out there. Is this going to be a phenomenon that runs on and waters down the messages given, or is this something that's going to flourish? Is this something that is going to evolve? Adrian, could I start with you?
Well, yes, there's a future for business books. So there'll always be a future for good books. I mean, I've read some very, very good business books over the last few years, and I've read some books that have not strictly business books, but I think the business people would find very helpful. And there are three that I would particularly recommend that people consider looking at. One of them is a book by Alistair Campbell. It's called Winners, and it basically looks at people from the worlds of sport, music, politics, business, who've been successful, and I think there's some important lessons there. Another book I'd urge people to look at, which has made a big impact on me, is a book called Black Box Thinking by a chap called Matthew Syed, saying, yeah, of course there's a future for business books.
Safaraz?
I think just on that, I mean, I think we've all got a book where it's impacted our life in some aspects. You know, whether that's a fiction, whether that's non-fiction, where we remember books. And it's a big part of our lives. I mean, if you go back to your school days, you remember the books that you read. You may have only read 4 or 5, but you remember them quite vividly. And for me, it's the same, very emotional, because you're in that sort of you're in that sort of space, and it's sometimes in terms of how we learn and how we think it can have a considerable impact. I spoke about attending property seminars, and there's a book that's held by that community. That's the Be All End All, which is the Rich Dad Poor Dad book. But I will stick to my guns on this, even though as the organizer of Business Book Awards, and a big believer in books, and I said, big believer and encourage for anybody to read books. It's again understanding your way of thinking and how you as an individual learn, and I think that's very important. How do you learn? And I'm going to try and recall. I mean, I'm not very good with quotations, but I'm trying to recall a quote by Alvin Tottler, which was basically the illiterate of the 21st century will be not the people who can't read or write, but it's the individual who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I think that's for me is you've got to be in that space of continuously pushing yourself, understanding yourself in terms of your own sort of emotional awareness and intelligence, and be able to not necessarily follow the crowd and herd to say, this book is magnificent and you should have it, and thinking that's the be all end all. Think in terms of what you want to do, what you want to achieve. If it's something that you want to learn, there's books on every subject matter on Amazon. And you can get that information out there. So if it's for a particular purpose, if it's for self-development, if it's something that you want to, if it's somebody that you admire and respect, then autobiographies and biographies is a good way to start. For me, that's the first thing that I would say to anybody is, if you're new to books, don't go and pick up a business book off the shelf, because it's going to be difficult for you. Look at somebody that you respect, you admire, whether that's a politician, whether that's a sports person, whether it's a TV star, and maybe look at, because you're already interested in that subject matter. If you're already interested in the subject matter, then you're likely to actually get more value from that. You'll develop your own skill sets in terms of concentration, in terms of thinking, and what you'll find is you'll feel better, and you'll get the bug for books, and you'll be able to then move from there. So don't jump necessarily in the deep end. Don't just follow somebody else's recommendation. Just think about what your likes are, and just reflect, and then follow that particular journey.
Safaraz Adrian, thank you very much for being with me today to talk about business books. I've learned a hell of a lot. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Goodbye for now.